This is part 83 of my series on my N-gauge model railway project. Previous parts cover the project from its inception, through the creation of the baseboard, selection and laying of track, building of scenic items, obtaining rolling stock, etc. The project is ongoing. This part just deals with my most recent tinkering, crewing and lamping a couple more Union Mills locos and experimenting with a backdrop to at least partially hide stuff at the west end of the layout. There'll be some train cam footage at the end of the video to see how the backdrop experiment looks from the point of view of a train. I've been gradually going through my locos trying to add footplate crew and appropriate headlamps. It's a fairly fiddly job, so I generally only do one loco at a time. I believe this one here was the first Union Mills loco I ever obtained, the G2 Super D. As you can see here, I've uncoupled the tender from the loco so that I could get in to add crew. It's quite tricky using cyanoacrylate superglue to fix these little figures in place. Here's a fireman with his shovel glued into place on the front of the tender, using just spots of CA on his feet. And here you can see the driver working his controls and looking ahead, again just glued by using a toothpick to apply CA to his feet and then placing him with tweezers. Tricky to get the figure in place without also gluing the tweezers. Once the CA holding the crew was cured, I recoupled the loco and tender by reinserting the right-hand screw here through the coupling bar. Here you can see the crew in place after recoupling the tender. It's unfortunate that the wire gets in the way, but I think the positioning of the crew looks fairly reasonable. Here's a flash picture still on the bench. It is a pity about the honking great wire, but I don't really see what can be done about it. It's basic to the operation of the model. Next, I tried to put headlamps on the loco. I was aiming here for code F, freight, mineral or ballast train. Unfortunately, I got the top lamp a bit skew-whiff. Gluing these tiny lamps without also gluing the tweezers is even harder than working with the crew figures. The ones on the buffer bar are not so bad, as so long as the base of the lamp is flat they sort of self-level, but trying to glue on a top lamp is extremely tricky. These lamps are white metal items with jewels. Some of them were Langley, which had to be painted and then to have the jewels glued in, which was an extremely fiddly job itself. Others were Springside items, which came painted and with the jewels already fitted and just needed to be cut off the sprue and to have their bottoms filed flat. Here's the engine back on the layout with a train. It's a pity that the top lamp isn't level, but I suppose it could happen, and I hesitate to break it off and try again, as I'm not sure I could do any better. Here's the whole train coming past the woods. You can just see the driver through the cab window. And here's the engine in scrapped-off station. And finally parked back in its siding by Colville Station. I've been leaving this loco and its train on the layout, parked in this siding. I thought I'd experiment with doing something about the view at the west end of the layout. If you've watched previous videos in this series, you'll know that whenever we looked at this end, we saw a giant aeroplane, a large radio-controlled de Havilland Beaver, that I had stored leaning up against the shelving at this end. I had a couple of sections of the Fowler backdrop I used for the east end of the layout left over, as only 2 of the 3-foot sections were needed for that end. So I thought it might be worth trying to hang one of those sections somehow over the plane. I taped the backdrop section to a length of 1/2-inch square balsa I had on hand, using invisible tape, and then taped another length of the balsa to the bottom to hold the backdrop straight and weigh it down. Then I just used thread to hang this over the plane. Really, it doesn't look very sensible like this, but it is somewhat effective for taking photographs if the camera angle and the zoom are arranged right. Here's the LNER train from my previous video coming up to the viaduct, and photographed like this it definitely looks better, I think, than just seeing the plane in the background. Although even for photography it's tricky, as the backdrop is further away and really doesn't catch the flash. It also isn't entirely flat, but still it does allow some improvement for photos. The coaling tower casts a shadow on the backdrop as well, which is of course wrong, but it's still better than just seeing the plane. Here you can hardly see the backdrop at all, but it still improves the picture. So definitely somewhat useful for photographs, even if it doesn't actually look great in reality. The train here is pulled by the Union Mills 3F in LMS red, which I got out from its siding to be my next subject for crewing and lamping. In the siding to the scrapped-off goods shed is a little train pulled by a Graham Farish Black 5. So I do think it's worth having this little hanging backdrop there, although it would be good if I could come up with a better solution in the long term. The limitation is that there's not much space and I really need to be able to walk past this end of the layout. Here's the red F on the bench ready for crewing and lamping. Quite a nice little loco. Some additional detail painting and weathering could be done to improve it, and I may get around to that. Here's where the crew need to go, and it would be almost impossible to get the figures in without uncoupling the loco and the tender. And there's also really nothing to be done about that darned wire. So I unscrewed this screw so I could pull it out and detach the tender drawbar. This screw also retains the connecting wire, so care has to be taken to get that reattached properly. Once the loco and tender are separated, I can glue on the figures. I went with the same arrangement as for the G2, fireman on the tender with his shovel getting down coal and driver at the left at the controls. This was about the best I could do in the way of attaching the figures. And here they are with the loco and tender coupled up again. The wire isn't too noticeable here, you can just see it behind the fireman. It's hard to even see the driver, but his position seems fairly reasonable. I suppose I could have put a driver figure leaning out. In this case I used a different style of lamp, and I went with code J, freight, mineral or ballast trains stopping at intermediate stations. This is easier to do as it only requires one lamp sitting on the buffer bar. And here is the 3F, still light engine at this point, in scrapped-off station with its crew and its lamp. And now hooked up to its train going over the scrapped-off level crossing. The horse and cart in the background are from the P&D Marsh goods yard set. You can see the fireman's shovel here. And the train goes down under the Lone Star footbridge with the new backdrop showing again. It's not very easy to see both crew figures, but I think it's definitely better to have them. Here's the train coming out of the tunnel. You can certainly see the lamp, but you can barely see the crew. And coming around the corner by the woods. I just did locos this week, but I do have some lamps with red jewels as well for use as tail lamps, and I should fit those to the brake vans. Here you can see the G2 and the 3F together, back in their respective sidings. And from the right angle, you can just about see all of the crew figures. Now let's look at some train point of view video to see how the little hanging backdrop affects that. So here's the SQ11 action cam on its drop bogey little truck coming round being propelled by the Ginty. You can see the new backdrop at the end there. Hit the viaduct there. It always seemed annoying that you could really see that plane in the train cam video, and that couldn't be avoided. So I was hoping this might improve that, but I'm not sure that it really can be said to do so much. That's the tape hitting the viaduct girders there. It's too small, really. I mean, it's not doing any harm, but it's not doing an awful lot of good. Of course, you can see a lot of clutter, not just that, in a train cam video. You there's no way, I don't think I could ever set the layout up in such a way that a train cam video wouldn't show anything but proper backdrops. We stopped there because the camera won't go underneath that signal gantry, so now we're going back the other way. You know, the backgrounds can work up to a point, but you're always going to see room clutter in train cam video, I guess. And it's a little nicer having that there, but I'm trying to... Okay, so now I tried moving it a bit. I moved it over to the right a little bit, the backdrop, so that it hid the end of the wing on that side, because I figure it'd probably be better to at least do that. So you can see now it's a little bit further over, more in line with the corner of the layout. So as it can't hide the whole plane because it's not long enough. And you couldn't get on. That's Buckingham Station you're looking at there. The camera, you've got to get the camera very, not even centered on the wagon. You've got to get it actually slightly over to one side on the wagon so it'll get round. Otherwise it gets stuck on things. There's very little clearance. It barely gets round. And it can't get under the signal gantries, the camera. And here we come up to the viaduct again. And your tape is coming undone and hitting the viaduct. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, it's better than seeing the plane, I guess. I'm trying to do your tape up there, that's why you're shaking. I mean, it's better having that backdrop there, but still pretty unsatisfactory. Of course, you can see that's me on the right, obviously, operating things. And you can see all sorts of other clutter there, and I'm never going to be able to hide all the clutter. And I didn't get you centered right on the wagon then. You're still hitting the girders. You have to be just right to get past things. Just shoving the camera a little bit to one side there so you can get through. Yeah, well, I mean, that's nicer than seeing the plane all the way as you come down there. You can still see one wing of the plane, though, because the plane has, about a 4.5-foot wingspan and nearly 5-foot wingspan, and that background is only 3 feet. Into Colville Station here, the Valencian Empire of India on the right there, and that's that new little Graham Farish canopy I put on platform 3 on the left there. You can see it again as we go past there, that canopy there. Just added that. And you can see those 2 engines on the right there that I put the crew and lamps on this week. Lots more clutter in view there. So the backdrop hides some of the clutter a bit, but very limited is success, really, still. What can you do? Better than nothing, but as I say, I'm never going to be able to get backdrops regular enough that you can't, they'll cover everything up from a train cam point of view. But this is a marginal improvement at best. Handy for still photographs.